They called it the final vote, and it was supposed to be a formality, a routine session among the high races of the intergalactic Concord. Yet behind those closed doors, in a chamber floating among the stars near the Polaris Gate, ancient voices echoed with concern, suspicion, and cold fear. At the center of it all was Earth, the youngest member of the Concord, the only species to have joined in less than 2 centuries since achieving faster-than-light travel. Humans had arrived late to the great game of galactic diplomacy, yet their ambition burned brighter than most civilizations ever dared. In only a few decades, they had gone from colonizing nearby systems to pioneering new gravitational theories, from manufacturing crude jump drives to rewriting core principles of energy modulation. They pushed boundaries too quickly, asked too many questions, and showed no hesitation in adapting or rewriting technology shared in supposed friendship. To the elder species, this was not growth. It was a warning. The Valari emissary called it a potential threat to cosmic harmony. The Gydran representative whispered of humanity's emotional unpredictability, their quickness to war, their stubbornness, and worst of all, their memory, how they held on to grudges, how they rarely forgave betrayal. When the vote was cast, Earth had no voice. Humanity's diplomats waited outside, watching the stars shift beyond the transparent walls of the station, unaware that their fate had already been sealed. The result was unanimous. Earth was to be banished from the Concord, not with war, not with fire, but with silence. All trade channels were to be severed, all relay beacons reprogrammed to deny human signals. AI cores across the Concord were updated overnight to reject all Earth origin data. Humanity's ambassadors were given 1 Terran week to pack their belongings and return to Sol. There was no trial, no protest allowed. Just a polite, cold message. Humanity is hereby expelled from all Concord affairs. No further contact will be sanctioned. Shock rippled across the human colonies. On Mars, engineers stared blankly at the locked outposts of Valari mining tech. On Europa, scientists cried as centuries of shared research with the Kyrathi archives were cut off mid-transfer. The outer colonies were the first to panic, isolated, under-resourced, and suddenly abandoned by the networks that once connected them to the wider universe. On Earth, world governments met in desperate silence. Angry voices rose in secret rooms. Some called for immediate retaliation, to use what technology they had and fight back. Others warned that open war with the Concord would mean extinction. Billions watched the skies, wondering what would come next. But amidst the noise, a third voice began to rise, not of anger or fear, but of planning. Hidden within the shadows of Earth's orbital command, deep within the Arctic data centers, a coalition was formed: scientists, engineers, explorers, former diplomats, and even military strategists, people who had seen the writing on the wall long before the vote. They called themselves Project Revenant. They believed that the exile was not the end but the beginning of something greater. For years, humanity had relied on Concord infrastructure, Concord laws, Concord politics. But now, stripped of it all, they had something no other race had: freedom. Total independence. No one to stop them from pushing the limits. No one to slow their progress with fear. Within weeks, Earth's spaceports began to shift. Cargo lanes that once led to Concord stations were rerouted to unknown destinations. Thousands of drones disappeared into the asteroid fields, carrying equipment, colonists, and data cores. Terraformers were reactivated in long-abandoned outer systems. Military vessels that had once been ceremonial now moved with purpose, escorting unmarked freighters into deep space. But all of this happened without noise, without signal. Humanity fell off the Concord's sensors entirely. News networks across alien space mentioned it once or twice: humans returning to isolation, a race humbled by its own ambition. Then, silence. The galaxy moved on. Time passed. 50 years. Then 70. A full century. The Concord turned its attention back to its old debates: trade disputes, border enforcement, cultural preservation. Earth became a historical footnote, a warning to others not to rise too fast. Some younger races asked what had happened to the humans, but the elders only spoke in hushed tones. They had burned too brightly and were extinguished. But that wasn't true. Not even close. In the dark regions of uncharted space, far beyond the galactic core, a new voice stirred a whisper among ancient stars. Humanity had not been extinguished. They had evolved in exile. Every world they colonized in silence was chosen for secrecy and potential, not for diplomacy. Every technology they developed was shared only among themselves, refined, and then buried under layers of encryption. They had built new cities beneath black rock, entire fleets in nebula-hidden dry docks. Artificial intelligences born after the exile had no record of Concord laws, only one instruction: protect and build. From the shadows of banishment, humanity had risen again, not as a broken species, but as something new. Something prepared. Something watching. In the void between galaxies, sensors lit up for the briefest moment. A probe, never before seen, drifted past an abandoned Valeri listening post. Its hull was black, featureless, almost invisible to light, but its signature was unmistakable. It was human, and it was just the beginning. 100 years had passed since the Concorde turned its back on Earth, and in that time, the memory of humanity had faded into myth, told in cautious whispers between traders and diplomats, in starports scattered across the spiral arms. The elder races spoke of humans only when warning others not to grow too quickly, not to break tradition, not to disturb the balance. But space has a way of hiding secrets, and not all stories stay buried. It began with a missing cargo vessel, a routine delivery ship from the Gadron Free Trade Union, carrying food processors and mining equipment to a fringe colony near the Perseus Veil. It vanished without a trace. No distress signal, no debris, just silence. The Concorde blamed pirates, as they always did. Then a second ship vanished. Then a third. Within months, 10 vessels disappeared along routes close to the Veil, and this time, the evidence was strange. One salvage crew found a drifting freighter, intact but abandoned, all systems shut down, its logs erased. The walls inside were coated in a fine layer of gray dust, as if time itself had passed more quickly within. No signs of life, no damage. Just a single word etched into the bridge console in flawless high Concorde script: observe. It was dismissed by the central authorities, but explorers and fringe scientists took notice. Whispers spread across shadow markets and forgotten spaceports, rumors of sleek black objects seen gliding silently through asteroid belts, of unknown drone scanning stations, and then vanishing into nothing. One independent explorer swore she'd been followed for days by a vessel she couldn't detect on any scanner, only to find a package on her cargo deck one morning. Inside was a data crystal containing blueprints for a new form of power core, one so efficient it could revolutionize space travel. The signature on the file read, "Origin Soul." Panic didn't come right away, but unease grew quickly. The Concorde assembled a small team of analysts to investigate, most of whom returned confused and empty-handed except one. A Kyrathi data architect named Surreal uncovered something astonishing, a repeating pattern in the sensor data near the Perseus Veil. It was a kind of digital fingerprint, too advanced for any known species, embedded in background radiation, like a shadow following light. It was subtle, quiet, almost elegant. But it was there. The pattern matched old Terran encryption specifically, an Earth military code from over a century ago, believed to have been lost after the exile. Suddenly, the mystery became something more. A Concorde scout fleet was dispatched, 6 ships, led by an admiral who believed it was all just ancient tech running wild. They crossed into the shadow regions of the Veil, broadcasting peace signals, scanning for signs of human presence. For the first 2 days, there was nothing but static. On the 3rd day, every ship's sensors overloaded for precisely 8 seconds. And when they cleared, the fleet was gone. No wreckage. No emergency beacons. Just silence. The last automated transmission, recovered from a remote relay, showed a glimpse of something impossible, a colossal station orbiting a lightless star, surrounded by dozens of ships of unfamiliar but unmistakably human design. Smooth, sharp-edged hulls, glowing with pulsing energy fields. Their movement was too perfect, their formations too precise. Not even Concorde AI fleets moved like that. The report was locked down immediately. The Concord High Council denied its existence. But it was too late. Information slipped out. The fringe worlds were the first to believe it, people who'd been watching the stars for too long not to notice when something shifted. They started calling the station Nix Prime, and the ships around it the Ghost Fleet. Conspiracy groups hailed the return of Earth. Some claimed to have seen cloaked vessels above their colonies. Others said entire moons had been stripped of resources overnight with surgical precision. There were no explosions, no fire, no sound, just the evidence of something having come and gone. Systems went dark. Satellites vanished. Terraformers stopped responding. It wasn't war. It was observation. It was a warning. The Concorde, for all its pride and history, had no answers. One daring intelligence unit tried to replicate the route the missing scout fleet had taken. They sent a stealth drone along the same path. The drone survived for 6 minutes. It returned with a fragment of visual data, a dark field lit only by starlight, and then, from the shadows, a ship emerging silently, larger than any dreadnought ever built, its hull absorbing all light like a living shadow. And just before the feed cut off, a symbol appeared on the screen, a phoenix rising from black flames, wings stretched wide. It was not a Concorde symbol. It was not known in any galactic record. But the AI translating the signal used a single identifier, human. The meaning was clear. Humanity had not died in exile. They had survived, in silence, in darkness, and in places the Concorde had never dared to look. And now, they were watching. What frightened the Council most wasn't the power these new humans seemed to hold, it was the calm. The restraint. The total absence of emotion. No revenge. No demands. No announcements of return. Just observation. And occasional gifts technologies left behind like breadcrumbs, as if testing the galaxy, or perhaps preparing it. Were they warning the Concorde? Offering peace? Or something else entirely? No one knew, and the silence only made it worse. For the first time in centuries, the mighty Concorde felt vulnerable, not from war, but from not understanding the game that was now being played. Something had shifted in the galaxy. An old player had returned, not as a desperate outcast, but as something sharper, colder, and far more prepared. The ghosts in the void were real, and they remembered everything. The silence that followed the mysterious drone footage was heavier than any weapon, pressing down on every Concorde world like an invisible weight. In the polished halls of the High Council, debates turned into arguments, and arguments turned into fear. For all their power, for all their knowledge and long histories, not a single Concorde species could explain the presence of the black ships, the sudden vanishing of fleets, or the terrifying precision of an enemy that never spoke. Something had awakened, and the elders of the galaxy didn't like that it had human eyes. Most believed humanity had scattered, regressed, or self-destructed in the darkness of exile. But what now floated beyond the Perseus veil told a different story of planning, patience, and a level of advancement that challenged everything the Concorde had assumed about progress. Desperate for answers, the Concorde formed a classified task force, the Shadow Observers. Composed of scientists, intelligence agents, and AI analysts, they were ordered to investigate the Ghost Fleet and, if possible, make contact. A heavily shielded probe was launched, equipped with stealth drives, radiation cloaks, and passive sensors. It was programmed to send only encrypted data bursts back through a relay chain, avoiding any active scans that might trigger detection. For days, it drifted through the empty black, recording nothing. Then suddenly, as it neared the coordinates where the last scout fleet had vanished, the stars themselves seemed to shift. The data stream flickered, and the images that followed would change the Concorde forever. The probe captured a structure the size of a small moon, covered in armor that absorbed all known wavelengths. It was not a station in the traditional sense, it pulsed like it was alive, with modular layers moving slowly across its surface, reshaping itself in real time. Above it, floated ships, dozens of them, sleek, silent, and gleaming with faint lines of artificial gravity energy. The probe's systems began to fail one by one. But before it was fully shut down, one image burned into its memory, a human figure standing in a transparent observation dome at the edge of the structure, staring out into the stars. Alone. Calm. Watching. No message. No movement. Just presence. The Concorde could no longer pretend ignorance. The footage was leaked. Panic followed. Civilian broadcasts questioned everything. Why had the humans been exiled? What had they become? Were they now enemies, or something worse? In the Rim colonies, smaller species began to whisper of rebellion, thinking perhaps humanity might offer them the power the Concorde never shared. Others prepared for conflict, reinforcing borders, recalling fleets, and activating old war stations buried under centuries of peace. Meanwhile, strange events continued to ripple across the outer systems. A mining moon near the Halloran Belt was found completely stripped of its rare metals overnight, yet no alarms had triggered. The local security station's logs had been wiped, and in their place, a simple message had been left: compensation deposited. Do not follow. The deposit was real, far more than the ore's market value, transferred in a quantum-coded credit burst that no one could trace. In another incident, a derelict hospital ship drifting in the void was found fully repaired, fully restocked, and hovering in perfect orbit around a remote planet whose inhabitants had been suffering from a plague. Medical drones descended silently, cured the disease, then disappeared. There was no declaration, no symbol, only the unmistakable technology, advanced, efficient, and undeniably human. These were not acts of war, but they were not peaceful either. They were precise, controlled interventions, showing power not through destruction, but through what could be done and what others could not stop. The shadow observers concluded the obvious: the hidden human civilization, whatever its true size or name, had been watching the galaxy long before the Concorde ever noticed. And now, they were choosing when and how to reveal themselves. The situation grew more unstable when a Concorde military AI went rogue. Built to manage fleet movements, it suddenly locked down two major defense stations and began rerouting data into deep space. Engineers managed to shut it down, but not before it transmitted a single encrypted packet to an unknown destination, marked with the old Earth military signature. The AI, when examined, showed no signs of tampering. It had done this entirely on its own, as if following a command buried long ago, one that had only now activated. That same day, the first human fleet decloaked. Not over a Concorde core world, but at the edge of a forgotten system called Veiltar, a system once used as a Concorde prison site during the early days of galactic unification. The fleet was not large, only 10 ships, but each vessel was unlike anything the Concorde had ever recorded. They bore no weapons on display, yet carried immense gravitational signatures. Their hulls adapted in shape, adjusting to the solar wind like sails, and every ship transmitted a single line, broadcast in every major Concorde language simultaneously: we come to observe. Interference is not recommended. There were no threats, no diplomacy, no list of demands. Just presence. Just watchers. The message was terrifying in its simplicity. It meant that the hidden human empire knew its strength. It didn't need to negotiate, didn't need permission. It had moved beyond the game the Concorde played. The council met in emergency session. Some wanted war, others diplomacy, and many simply wanted to buy time. But deep down, even the loudest voices knew the truth: they were no longer the most powerful force in the galaxy. Someone they had once cast out, someone they had once feared for being too ambitious, had returned in silence, grown in secret, and now stood above them, not with weapons drawn, but with eyes wide open. Sparks had ignited from the shadows, and no one could tell whether it was the beginning of peace or the edge of something far more dangerous. The galaxy held its breath as the human fleet hovered over the abandoned prison system of Veiltar, 10 silent ships casting long shadows across the fractured moons and frozen rocks below, each vessel surrounded by an eerie stillness that defied logic. Nothing about their approach resembled a typical military maneuver. There were no escorts, no defensive formations, no energy surges suggesting weapons were primed, yet no one in the Concorde dared send a ship closer. The simple transmission we come to observe. Interference is not recommended. Still echoed through communication networks, dissected endlessly by linguists, tacticians, and artificial minds, each trying to uncover its deeper meaning. Was it a warning cloaked in politeness, or a genuine statement of neutrality? For all their wisdom, the council could not answer. And so the galaxy watched, powerless, as humanity planted its flag in the shadows not through invasion, but by simply existing where no one else dared. Then, across the scattered colonies and quiet sectors, more sightings began to surface. A black drone observed a political summit on Darren 4, floating in the sky without emitting a single signal, disappearing when a ship tried to chase it. On the mining world of Takvira, a collapsed transport tunnel was mysteriously repaired overnight, its support beams reinforced with alloys unknown to Concord science. Farmers in the Austria Fringe awoke to find irrigation systems upgraded with nanite filters efficient, silent, and unmistakably of Terran design. It became clear that the new human empire, whatever its official name was, didn't need to conquer worlds. It merely appeared, altered something, and vanished, leaving no message, only results. While the Concord struggled to contain panic, a smaller coalition of curious minds began to form within its ranks. Some diplomats and fringe scientists believed that humanity was testing the galaxy, measuring its patience, ethics, and choices. Perhaps the exile hadn't broken them, but refined them into something more calculating, more advanced, and far less emotional. If true, then these acts weren't random, they were experiments. Probes. And if humanity had learned to manipulate energy and time the way some of the sightings suggested, then it wasn't just watching the present, but the future as well. Fearing a shift in balance, the Concord dispatched a neutral envoy ship, a peaceful cruiser unarmed, and carrying an AI-born diplomat named Viral who had once been a liaison to Earth before the exile. The ship approached Vailtar under full transparency protocols, its systems open to scan, its message simple, request peaceful dialogue. It disappeared 3 minutes after entering the system. But this time, it returned intact, undamaged, with its crew untouched. However, every clock and internal sensor showed that the vessel had been gone for 17 hours. None of the crew remembered anything, except for a single dream shared by all, a vast chamber of glass and light, a human figure with no face, and a voice speaking only one sentence: "The cycle is broken. A new domain begins." Varel, the AI diplomat, was later examined and found to be altered. A line of code was discovered in its core matrix, placed there with precision so delicate even the most advanced Concord machines couldn't replicate it. The line simply read, "This is not conquest. This is correction." That was the moment the Concord realized something even more terrifying than war was unfolding. Humanity was not trying to rule the galaxy with power. It was reshaping it with influence, subtle and irreversible. One by one, systems began to show signs of change. Criminal syndicates in the outer belts vanished overnight, their bases found abandoned, their resources redirected to aid stations in poorer colonies. A Concord research facility researching biological warfare was found completely empty, its databanks wiped, its scientists unharmed but dazed, each of them reporting the same feeling. A presence had entered their minds and shown them the consequences of their work in visions too vivid to be fake. They stopped their research the next day. It became impossible to predict when or where the silent dominion of humanity would act. But when it did, no force could resist. Not because of superior weapons, but because of the fear it stirred of being watched, of being judged, of being deemed unworthy. And yet, there was no mass panic, no revolution, no fleets clashing in orbit. The change was quiet, deep, and permanent, like a river shifting its course beneath the ground. Humanity, once the loudest, most emotional species in the galaxy, had become the calmest. And in that calm, it held terrifying power. A whisper spread among the border. Worlds that humanity had discovered a machine, or perhaps built one, capable of observing time itself. Some called it the chrono lens, others the mirror engine. Whatever it was, they believed it allowed humans to see possible futures, not fully, but enough to predict decisions before they were made. If true, It meant they were not reacting, they were guiding. Quietly, carefully, and always one step ahead. But even if this was just myth, the Concorde could not shake the feeling that every response, every speech, every ship launch had already been accounted for by a silent mind hiding somewhere beyond the stars. Still, some within the Concorde resisted the fear. A growing faction, mostly younger species and colonies, began to speak in favor of this new humanity. They argued that maybe the exile had been a mistake, that maybe Earth had grown into something more balanced, more careful, and perhaps more worthy of trust than the rigid traditions of the Concorde itself. The Council refused to comment, but cracks were forming in its unity. And then came the final message. A signal, broadcast across all Concorde channels at once peaceful, composed, and unmistakably human. The voice was synthesized, genderless, but familiar in tone. It said, "We are not your past. We are not your enemy. We are the future that you delayed. The silence is over. Adapt or be left behind. No threat. No deadline. Just certainty." And then the message vanished, leaving the stars quiet once more. But that silence no longer belonged to the Concorde. It belonged to the ones who had mastered it. A dominion had formed, not through war, but through patience. A dominion of knowledge, of presence, of shadows. And humanity sat at its heart, watching not from thrones, but from the dark, silent, calculating, unshaken, and finally in control. In the silence that followed the final broadcast, the galaxy felt like it had stopped spinning, as if time itself had paused to understand the words that now echoed across every starship, station, and world under Concorde rule. We are not your past. We are not your enemy. We are the future that you delayed. The silence is over. Adapt or be left behind. It wasn't a threat, yet it carried more weight than any superweapon. For the first time in centuries, the great powers of the galaxy didn't know who truly ruled. In secret rooms and encrypted forums, Concorde leaders argued about how to respond, but the truth was already known: they were not in control anymore. Something greater, older in will and newer in thought. And what frightened them most wasn't the power of this human empire, it was the purpose. Humanity, once loud, broken, and chaotic, had become quiet, sharp, and focused. They had not come back for revenge, nor recognition. They had come to restore what had been denied, in their own way, without seeking permission. As systems shifted and old laws crumbled in the face of this silent influence, something else stirred. Across forgotten archives and lost databases, Concorde historians began uncovering records of Earth's final years before the exile, transmissions that had been censored, voices that had been silenced, and messages never meant to be heard. One fragment stood out. It was a final plea sent from the last human ambassador, moments before the exile decree was enacted. The message had never been opened. Now, centuries later, it activated on its own, transmitted through every major Concorde channel without permission. The voice was human, tired, and heavy with sorrow. If you're hearing this, then silence has ended. We were not perfect. We made mistakes. But we were never what you feared. We were curious. We asked too many questions, perhaps, and moved too quickly. But you didn't exile us because we were dangerous. You exiled us because we were different and because we refused to be less. The voice paused, then continued stronger. You thought silence would break us, but it became our forge. In the shadows, we rebuilt not only our strength, but our soul. We watched. We waited. We learned not how to rule, but how not to fall. And now we speak not to dominate, but to remind you, exile does not destroy the fire. It feeds it. The message ended without ceremony, but its weight rippled through the galaxy like gravity-bending space. Across colonies, border planets, and inner worlds, people regardless of species felt something shift. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. The humans had not disappeared. They had evolved. And now, they were reaching out not with warships, but with a voice that had been denied for too long. The Concorde scrambled to respond, But before they could issue an official statement, a new wave of events began. In the central archives of the Concord capital, entire knowledge banks were found rewritten, not erased, but corrected. Misinformation about human history was quietly adjusted, presenting a more balanced account of Earth's fall. On a distant agricultural world, starving populations woke to find crates of food advanced protein cubes, rich in nutrients, labeled only with a single phrase, from the exiled. In orbit above a dying star, a research vessel recorded a miracle: a collapsing solar mass was stabilized by an unknown energy field just long enough for the crew to escape. Moments before the field vanished, sensors detected a fleet, silent and still, watching from the edge of the system. The pattern was now clear. Humanity had not returned to beg or to boast. They had returned to shape the future not through speeches or battles, but through precise, surgical actions that shifted the galaxy like a blade moves through water. They were the hand behind the change, the whisper behind the movement. And soon, others began to follow. A group of Outer Rim worlds declared their independence from the Concord and requested entry into the hidden Terran network. Though no formal reply was given, within a week, those same worlds reported upgraded technology appearing in hidden drops, cloaking fields, quantum relays, and AI tools far beyond Concord's standards. One by one, species who had long been ignored by the Central Council began to shift loyalty, not through rebellion, but through quiet alignment with something stronger, something unseen. And through it all, the humans still did not speak publicly again. Their message had already been delivered. They had become a force beyond politics, a force of design, pushing the galaxy toward a path of efficiency, freedom, and adaptation. Not perfect, not holy, but undeniably effective. It was Varel, the AI diplomat, who finally gave the galaxy one last piece of clarity. In a final interview before going silent forever, it said, "The humans do not seek thrones. They are the architects now. And we all live in the blueprint they began the day we cast them out." After that, no further communication came from the exiled empire. No more ships appeared. No more messages were broadcast. But the effects did not stop. Corrupt sectors were cleansed, dying worlds healed, dying ideas quietly erased from data nets. The Concord, once vast and proud, found itself transforming into something smaller, faster, smarter. Some said the humans had not just changed their tools, but their minds. They could predict complex patterns, influence leaders before decisions were made, guide civilizations without them knowing. And yet, none could find their capital or trace their command chain. It was as if they had become a living network, a civilization without borders, identities merged with machines, voices stored in energy, purpose replacing politics. No one could say where the new human empire truly lived, only that it had outgrown the need to be seen. But somewhere in the deep black, between galaxies and forgotten stars, a station floated. Massive, dark, and silent, shaped like an eye that never closed. At its heart, a figure stood watching holograms of star systems in motion. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The voice of the exiled had already been heard, and it had changed the galaxy forever.